in all of the news of the last week and months, it was easy to forget that today is exactly 3 years since the war in Ukraine started. On the 22nd of February 2022, the Russian army invaded Ukraine. As some of you know, I have worked with the World Union for Progressive Judaism as co-chair of the Ukraine Crisis Fund over the last 3 years. And this week, the fund stopped operating as an emergency fund and became part of the World Union's regular programs. So there's still programs, but not in an emergency settings. Focusing mostly on rebuilding the Jewish life in Ukraine now, but mostly trying to understand how it will look like when and if the war will end. So together, progressive Jewish communities worldwide collected $3 million and provided humanitarian support to tens of thousands of victims of this war. The programs run in 11 countries, and the LGS-based Ukraine Legal Aid will continue to run every Friday until the end of 2025. Having been to Poland myself at the beginning of the war, and having worked with many organizations in Ukraine and Europe, I can say now that being a Jewish refugee, being refugee is a tragedy. But being a Jewish refugee makes this traumatic experience a little bit better and more comfortable. For historical reasons, Jewish people are more likely to have friends and family or relatives in other countries. Also, because of Jewish organizations, you can access more options for immigration and refugee shelters. In addition to that, Germany and Israel have special programs for Jewish immigration in addition to the existing support for Ukrainian refugees. So since the beginning of the war, I have had this question. Is it fair? Do Jewish communities need to be more proactive in reaching out to all refugees and ensuring that proportional representation of people is in place? For those who receive support are not only from Jewish organizations, are not predominantly Jewish, but everyone. And to be fair, most Jewish organizations don't segregate. They don't ask people whether they're Jewish or not. But naturally, there are vast majority of people who receive support from Jewish organizations are Jewish people. Or should we accept that we Jewish people must first of all look after our other Jews? And this is the question I don't have a clear answer to. A more general and philosophical question concerns the sense of justice in general. Is it possible to be absolutely fair in real life? Is there absolute justice in this world? The concept of absolute justice that is perfect, objective, unwavering, is one of the central philosophical and theological questions in Judaism and the Torah. And I think that the portion that we are reading today, Parashat Mishpatim, is particularly significant in addressing this issue. We've just read from the Torah reading that it has a detailed framework of law about ethical, social, and judicial matters. These laws are presented as divine law. So what you don't know is that a few chapters later, God started speaking. And this is what we've just read, is a little piece of God's words. So these laws are presented from the Torah as divine law, told by God. And here's an example. You must not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the majority to do evil, and so on, and so forth. We've just read it. You know this. Funny. I am being environmentally aware and don't print my sermons anymore. And guess what happened? The Words app just crashed. So interesting. Let me just try to reload it so that I can have the text in front of me. Everybody has Shabbat, I guess, even technology. Yes, it's okay. It's reopened. Yes. So this is the text that we've just read. So the fact that these laws are given directly by God probably suggests that at least in the text of the Torah, there is a notion of perfect justice. Perfect, absolute. However, implementing these laws is entrusted to human judges. And I think this raises the question whether justice in practice can ever be truly absolute. There is a famous Talmudic story in Tractate Bava Metzia. It illustrates this idea through the debate between Rabbi Eliezer, one rabbi, and his fellow rabbis. Imagine this scenario. Rabbi Eliezer was convinced that his ruling on a legal matter, doesn't matter what it was about, but he was convinced that he was correct. His view is the one that everybody should follow. But the other rabbis disagreed. Everybody else disagreed. Rabbi Eliezer tries to prove his points. He listed all possible arguments in the world. But rabbis still disagreed. They said, no, you are not right. Further, to prove his point, Rabbi Eliezer invoked miracles. He said, if I'm right, let this tree uproot itself and move for 20 meters. And it did. Then it says, if I'm right, can you see this river? Let the stream of this river reverse and flow backward. And it did. And rabbis said, what's the connection? What's the connection between walking trees and flow of river with this halachic and legal matter? No connection. We don't buy it. And then he said, if I'm right, let the walls of this synagogue or Beit Midrash fall. And the walls started to lean towards all the rabbis. And then there's a beautiful element that out of the respect for rabbis, the walls didn't fall, but out of respect to this rabbi, the Rabbi Eliezer, the walls couldn't stay straight. So they remained at the angle, like this, tension. And finally, a voice from heaven appeared and said, Rabbi Eliezer is correct. The voice from heaven. Despite all these signs, the sages refused to accept the miracles as proof. Rabbi Yehoshua stood and said, the Torah is not in heaven. Citing the Torah, by the way. This means that once the Torah was given to humanity, its interpretation was entrusted to human scholars, not divine voices. God is not in charge of earthly justice anymore. People are. Justice, while rooted in divine wisdom, must be interpreted and applied by people, making it necessarily relative rather than absolute. To further illustrate this point, one of the rabbis stood up and quoted Torah again. And this is what he said. Remember, the Torah says, side with the majority. Meaning that This is the democratic principle that the majority should decide on the matter, not the divine intervention or miracles. But you know what? This rabbi is cited from this week's Torah portion. Ironically, this quote is shamelessly taken out of the context from this week's Torah portion. In the original, it says, "You shall neither side with the majority to do wrong." And remember, an alternative translation, "You shall neither side with rabbis to do wrong." But these rabbis quoted it anyway, just taking it out of the context. Isn't it ironic and cynical in some way? So what is it all about? I think Jewish thought came to the following conclusion. Absolute justice does exist, but only as an ideal. It belongs to God and not to us. In the human realm, in the earthly life, justice is limited and shaped by time, our bias, and circumstance. Life in the last few years has tested many of our values. It has made us ask very difficult questions about fairness, responsibility, and justice. While we may not always find clear answers, perhaps the most important lesson from the Torah is that we must never stop asking. This week, as I mentioned before, we mourn the heartbreaking injustice, the tragic death and return of bodies of 2 children and now their mother from Biba's family, alongside with another dead hostage. Those innocent souls should never have been caught up in the terrible conflict. Their loss is a painful reminder of how unfair and cruel the world can be. And of course, it's also a reminder of many other innocent souls that were destroyed in this war on all sides. At the same time, we see the prospect of an unjust end to the war in Ukraine, one that might be forced without properly listening to those who have suffered most. If that happens, it will not be fair. It will be just another example of the strong deciding for the weak. Right now, we are witnessing many injustices. And yes, I know, and we all know, that human justice will never be perfect. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying. If anything, it means we must try even harder. Because the more unfair the world seems, the more we need to stand up for what is right. Maybe we cannot change geopolitics, and maybe we have no power over the decisions made by world leaders, but we do have control over something smaller, our own choices, our community, and the people around us. When we see so much injustice on a global scale, it is easy to become blind to the suffering of individuals next to us and say, well, because it happens to so many people, why should I care? But we can become cynical, as if justice and fairness are just illusions. But we must not give up. If anything, this should make us try even harder, within the limits of what we, each of us, can do. We can make a difference by helping one person, speaking up for what's right, for showing kindness where needed. You should do good and right thing, not because it will make the entire world bright and kind, but because without you and your light, it will be even darker. Shabbat Shalom.